two parts of this as it closes out. Great storyline. Ancestry.com. You ever been on that before? They advertise a lot on TV. Find your ancestors, Ancestry.com, da-da-da-da. And you go, and they'll give you a little bit for free, and then you have to pay for the rest. But I'm going to tell you this morning the cheapest way to find out your family tree. You ready? You're just on the edge of your seat, I can tell. Cheapest way to find out your family tree is to run for a public office. You'll find out real quick who you belong to, who's part of your family. You know, the children of a prominent family, they decided to give their father a book of the family's history for his birthday, and they commissioned a professional biographer to do all the work, but they carefully warned this guy. They said, hey, we want to warn you in advance of the black sheep of our family, Uncle George. He had been tried and convicted of murder and executed in an electric chair. So the biographer, he assured the children, he said, I can handle the situation so that there will be no embarrassment to the family. I'll merely say that Uncle George occupied a chair of applied electronics at an important government institution. He was so attached to his position by the strongest ties, and his death came as a total shock. Some of you, it's the rain, I think. Some of you, it'll hit you later in the day. You know, Matthew did a lot of digging to find out the family tree or the lineage of Jesus. The facts of Jesus' ancestry, it was well documented throughout history, and it was very well preserved. In fact, in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1, there's 17 verses. We meet 46 people that span over 2,000 years of Jesus' family tree, all ancestors of Jesus. And they varied considerably in their professions, in their spirituality, in their personality, and in their lifestyle. I mean, some were very famous, like Abraham and Isaac and King David, and then there were some surprises as well in his family tree. People that you normally wouldn't include in your family lineage if you were trying to make it look good and trying to make Jesus look real important and to be the Messiah. Instead, Matthew goes out of his way to let everyone know about some of the shady characters in Jesus' past and in his family lineage. So he begins with a genealogy, and his goal is to prove to his Jewish audience, which Matthew was a Jew himself, he wanted to prove to the Jewish audience that, first of all, that Jesus was related to Abraham, who was the father of all Jews. And second of all, he wanted to prove that Jesus was related to King David, whom all the prophecy said that Jesus would be a direct descendant from the lineage of David. So he was out to prove these two things, and in the process of giving the family tree, Matthew underscores some people that we would have probably skipped over had we been writing the genealogy, because we wouldn't want people to know about their past. Last week we talked about a couple of people in Jesus' family tree who had really, really bad backgrounds, and they did some awful things. We talked about Judah and Tamar, and how a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law had a baby together, and his name was Perez, and Perez is listed in the lineage of Jesus. So why did Matthew highlight these kind of people? Why did he put them in the story? Because they were a part of the story, but more importantly, they were the point of Jesus' story. So Matthew is writing to a very religious group of people in a very religious environment that believed in order to have right standing with God that you had to be in right standing with God based on the things that you had done or the bad things that you had not done. In fact, most all religions embrace that in some shape or form or fashion, that, you know, you get in a relationship with God because you do a lot of good things, and you get out of a relationship with God because you do a lot of bad things. That we approach God based on all the good things we've done and the bad things that we've avoided. The problem with this approach is you never know when you've done enough. Matthew knows he's about to launch into the greatest story that's ever been told. It's the story where God is going to reiterate something that he's been saying all along, that has been true all along, and that is that humanity has been invited to approach God on a relational level. That man could actually have a relationship with Almighty God. And the foundation of that relationship was not based on anything that we had done or anything that we had not done. That the foundation of that relationship was solely based on what God had done for us. So to his Jewish audience, Matthew begins by saying, remember, 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 all along God has chosen the unworthy, He's chosen sinners, He's chosen lawbreakers, He's chosen those that most people would not choose in order to extend His grace, His mercy, and His forgiveness. So Matthew begins in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1, he begins reciting this genealogy, and he recites it with kind of the cadence of, you know, when you're on the interstate and you kind of go over the edge of the line and you hit those little bumps and it goes ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. You know what I'm talking about? Well, that's what Matthew 1 sounded like to me before I really began to dig into it. It was like, who begat who begat who begat who, and you know, and we're just out of there. But he starts in Genesis 1:1 and he says, this is the written story of the family line of Jesus, the Messiah. He's the son of David. He's also the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. We talked about them last week. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, and we talked about her last week. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Now, if you're expecting a child in the near future, there's your name right there. I mean, wouldn't you like to grow up with the name Ram? Oh, here's little Ram, you know. Never mind. So Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Now, for a Jewish audience, when they heard that word Rahab, they were like, oh, we know the story of Rahab. In fact, Rahab had a label in the Bible, and if you know anything about the Bible or a little history of the Bible, you know what that label is. When we hear the name Rahab, we always refer to her as Rahab the what? The prostitute, or King James says the harlot. She had a label. Throughout the Bible, we find people with nicknames and with labels that we kind of fill in the blanks. So I'm going to give you a little test this morning, and it's okay to talk out loud, and you fill in these blanks of people who had labels. John the Baptist, Jesus the Messiah. The brother of John was known as John the Beloved. And what about Thomas? Doubting Thomas. And it goes on through history. I mean, even people on in the Bible. What about these? Alexander the, Attila the, Conad. Here's one. Buffy the younger crowd says Vampire Slayer. Yeah. You did good. Give yourself an A. You see, throughout history, whether it's history or fiction, it's not uncommon for people to have labels attached to their name. It was something descriptive about them. Unfortunately for Rahab, her label read Rahab the harlot, or Rahab the prostitute. She wasn't even Jewish, and on top of all that, she was a Canaanite. And Canaanites were the enemies of the Jews. And this is where there's some tension created in the genealogy of Jesus. I mean, Matthew's going along, he's saying who belonged to who, belonged to who, belonged to who. And then he gets here, and all of a sudden there's some tension that builds. Now we're given right in the middle of the Christmas story, he brings up a prostitute. He skips, he could have skipped over and went right on with the story and nobody would have been none the wiser, but right in the middle of the story of Christmas and of Jesus, he brings up Rahab, the harlot. And he seems to stop there for just a moment, and he reminds the audience that in the middle of the story of grace and mercy and forgiveness, in the middle of Jesus' lineage, is a woman whose reputation is tainted by what she's done and the label that she wears. Why would he draw attention to that? Why would Matthew even bring this up in his story? It's because Rahab was a part of the story. And in fact, she was the point of the story. Let me catch you up. Let me give you her story. Israel is a brand new nation. They've just left Egypt, been delivered by all the miraculous signs and wonders that God did, parting the Red Sea. So Israel's a brand new nation. They just left Egypt, and they're coming to a promised land that God has given them. They got there. They went in and spied it out. The spies came back and said, no, we can't go there. There's too many giants. And Moses and none of the older people in that group were able to enter the promised land because of their unbelief. So now a new leader has emerged, a younger leader. Joshua's on the scene, and God says, now's the time that you're going to go in and possess this land that I've promised to give you guys. So it's the land where Abraham and Isaac and Jacob had once lived before they went to Egypt because of a famine that was in the land, where their brother Joseph saved their lives. Talked about that last week. It's just a handful of them when they left to go to Egypt. And now they've left Egypt some 2 to 3 million people strong. Moses is dead. Joshua's the new leader who will lead them into the promised land. They get to the Jordan River, and God says, the land that you're going to possess and that I promised you of your forefathers, it's all beyond this river. So they get to the river, and on the other side of the river is the controlling city of the land, a city called Jericho. In preparation to retake this land that God had promised them, Joshua sends 2 spies out into the city, and they're to scout out the city and come back and bring him a report. Well, they go into the city, they're spotted by the people in the city, and they say, there's 2 Israelites among us who are spying on us. So these Israelites go into a house that's located on the city wall, and it just happens to be the home of Rahab. She goes into the home. In the meantime, they lock the city down, and they say, we will search the city until we find these 2 spies. So they search the city. Someone says, hey, we saw them go into Rahab's house. So they send the guards to Rahab's house. She comes to the door. She says, yes, they were here, but they left before sundown, right before you locked the city down. If you hurry, you can probably catch them. And they leave in search of the 2 spies. And then Rahab goes up on her roof, where she's hidden the 2 spies under some flax that was drying on the roof. And then we pick up the conversation from there. It says, before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up on the roof to talk with them. I know the Lord has given you this land, she told them. We're all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror, for we have heard how the Lord made a path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. And here it is. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of heaven above and on earth below. Let me just stop there. What Rahab was saying was, hey, in spite of what I have heard, in spite of what I've grown up believing, in spite of all of these things I've been taught, I now believe that your God is the God, that your God is God over all of my household Canaanite gods. Your God is God over all other gods. He is God supreme. She has become a believer. Verse 12, now swear to me by the Lord that you'll be kind to me and my family since I've helped you. Give me some guarantees that when Jericho is conquered, you'll let me live along with my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all their families. We offer you our lives as a guarantee of your safety, the men agreed. In other words, you've saved our life, and yes, we will save yours. If you don't betray us, and we'll keep our promise, and we'll be kind to you when the Lord gives us this land. Now, what happens next in the story is a bit of history that maybe you're familiar with and you've heard of before, and it's called the Battle of Jericho. Joshua gets up one morning and he gets all of his generals together and he says, guys, we're fixing to advance on the city of Jericho, and here's the plan. And all the generals and Joshua, they're huddled around, and he said, here's the plan. He said, the first day, you're not even going to need your weapons. Just leave them in your tent. He said, all you need to bring is your tennis shoes. So on the first day, all we're going to do is we're going to get up and we're going to march around the city, and then we're going to go back to our tents. The generals are like, okay. And he said, on the second day, we're going to get up, leave your weapons in your tent, we're going to march around the city, and then we're going to go back to our tents. And generals are probably scratching their head going, oh, wait a minute. No, we're going to take the city, and you're talking about don't even bring our weapons, and we're going to march. And he said the third day, we're going to get up, we're going to march around the city, and they're like, okay. And then we're going to go back to our tents. They're like, gee. And he said on the fourth day, we're going to do the same thing. On the fifth day, we're going to do the same thing. On the sixth day, we're going to do the same thing. But on the seventh day, we're going to get up, and they're thinking, okay, here we go. We're going to get up, and we're going to march around the city. And they're going, we know. And we're going to march around the city. We're going to go back to our tent. He said, no, we're going to march around the city. And then we're going to do it again, and again, and again, and again. And on the 7th time around the city, no weapons. I just want you, on the 7th time around the city, I want you to shout as loud as you can to give glory to the God of Israel. Long story short, they follow his instructions. And he says, the reason we're doing this is I want there to be no doubt that God gets the credit for this victory. That there's no doubt to the people in the surrounding nations that our God is the God, that he's the real deal, that he's God of all gods. So they go out and they march as they're ordered, and on the 7th time, on the 7th day, the walls begin to shake and begin to come down, and Israel invades the city and conquers the city of Jericho. And in the midst of all the chaos and all the terror, God spares one family because of the faith of a Canaanite prostitute. He spares their family. We pick it up, the rest of the story, in Joshua 6:22. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the 2 spies, keep your promise, go to the prostitute's house, bring her out along with her family. So Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute and her relatives who were with her in her house because she had hidden the spies as Joshua sent to Jericho. And then this last line, I love this. This is like the happily ever after line to it. It says, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. She lives among the Israelites today as a picture, as an illustration that was foreign to everything that the people knew then. And that was that God is still a God of mercy and grace, and he would spare even a foreigner, an outsider, a prostitute, someone who by law should have been judged and condemned and destroyed. What the Bible doesn't tell us is the rest of the story. We have to fill in the lines in between it, so just bear with me. But what it doesn't tell us is that one day Rahab is out doing her chores, and she bumps into this guy named Salmon, and he says, like, hey, you want to go get a cup of coffee? And she's like, sure. And they go and have a cup of coffee, and then for long they have dinner together, and then one thing leads to another, and pretty soon these two get married. And they have a son. And they call their son Boaz. Boaz, he grows up, and when he's an older man, he meets a younger lady by the name of Ruth. And they get married. And they have a baby. And suddenly we realize that Ruth's great-great-grandson is King David. You see, Matthew paused to bring all this stuff to his readers' attention because he knew the story. He knew the story of Rahab, illustrated the story and the message of Jesus. Here's an outsider, an enemy, a lawbreaker who, according to the law of Moses, should have been shunned, should have been cast out of society, should have been killed. And God says that in spite of my law, my grace and my mercy is broader. My love and my forgiveness is broader than my judgment. My grace, my love, my mercy is large enough and broad enough not only to incorporate Rahab and save her life, but it's large enough to incorporate her into the lineage and in the family tree and into the story of Jesus the Christ. And I don't know about you, but that's absolutely incredible. That's a perfect illustration. But you know what? I don't think Rahab's story is too far away from our story, from your story and my story. Because just as Rahab had a label, we have labels, don't we? Don't we have labels? Labels that we try to distance ourselves from, that we keep running into. Labels because we have secrets. Labels because we have habits. Labels because of past relationships. And when we think about approaching God, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is our label. And suddenly we back off. And we go, well, God couldn't love me. God wouldn't include me. God can't use me because of my label. What's your label today? Maybe you're Carrie the coveter, or Grace the greedy, Gary the glutton, or Larry the luster. Maybe you're Adam the addict, Sam the swindler, James the jerk, Cherry the cheater, Barry the abuser, Jenny the jealous. What's your label? today. I'm guessing that Matthew gets to the Boaz, Salmon, Rahab thing, and again, he just throws Rahab's name in there. Rahab, the harlot. But why? Perhaps it was because Matthew had a label as well. You remember first week of the series we talked about him, and his label was Matthew the what? Tax collector. And a tax collector, that was a category lower than sinner. That was about as low as you could go in the day because you were betraying your own countrymen. You were betraying your own people, the Jewish people, by extorting them for money and taxes. So Matthew had a label. But Jesus looked at him, and Jesus didn't say, Matthew, once you quit being a tax collector, you come look me up. He didn't say, hey, Matthew, once you lay down this tax collecting gig and promise not to do it again, then you come follow me. Matthew, once you've repented of tax collecting and you've gone in a different direction, then you come and be my disciple. Or once you get a different label or you change the reputation you have about you, then come and follow me, Matthew. No, Matthew remembered the day that Jesus looked him eyeball to eyeball, caught him red-handed at the tax collector's booth, extorting his own people. And Jesus walked by him and said, Matthew, I want you to follow me. Just come on. Just follow me. Just join me. You see, Matthew knows he's about to tell the story of Jesus, the one who invites all kind of people with all kind of labels to follow him, to believe in him, while they're still wearing their labels. That His grace, His mercy, and His forgiveness. It's broad enough to cover everyone regardless of their past, regardless of the labels that they wear. That it's not about the label that we're wearing or the things that we've done. Christmas is about what's been done for us. The message of Christmas is that God has done for us what we could not do for ourselves. And you've been invited, and I've been invited, while we're still wearing our labels, to approach the God who has approached us during this Christmas season, to say, I want to begin a relationship with you. I want to invite you into a relationship that is purely based on what I've done for you and not what you can do for yourself. It's purely based on my love and my grace and my forgiveness. And Matthew, before he ever gets to the part of the story about angels and shepherds and wise men in Bethlehem and a manger, before he ever gets to the story of Jesus' life, before he ever gets to all of that, he wants you to know and he wants me to know that it's been God's agenda all along that God decided to pay for mankind's sin once and for all, regardless of our past, regardless of our present, regardless of the labels that we wear. And then don't miss this, He invites us to come into a relationship with Him. And once that relationship has begun, then He begins to chip away all those things that we really don't even want in our life anyway. But it's not in order to begin a relationship, it is the result of a relationship with Him. The story of Christmas is that God came to include you and me, regardless of our past, our present, regardless of our reputation, regardless of the labels that we wear. It's a story of God's love and His grace, His mercy, His forgiveness. It's about God doing for you what you couldn't do for yourself. Now, you can sit here this morning as we wrap this up and you can say, hey, one day I'm going to get my act together. One day I'm going to get all my ducks in a row. One day I'm going to clean up. One day when I get everything settled in my life. One day when it's more convenient. One day when I get things in order. Or you can sit here this morning and you can say, well, I'm determined today that I'm going to get up and turn over a new leaf. I'm going to walk out of here and start doing things different. I'm going to start going to church more regular. I'm going to start reading my Bible. I'm going to start doing a lot of good things, when I walk out of here today. Regardless of all that, you can sit here and decide that's what you're going to do, or you can start a relationship today with God simply based on what He's done for you and based on His love and His grace and His mercy that He's extending to you. The choice is ours. The choice is yours. God's done everything He can do. He's done it all for us so we can quit trying to do it ourselves. And He's offering grace and mercy and forgiveness. I want you to bow for prayer, and I'm going to invite you in just a moment to pray a prayer with me. And y'all can go ahead and come up. While your head is bowed in just this closing moment, I want to ask a question this morning, and I don't do this very, very rarely. But as you're sitting there and just eyes closed, reflecting on what you've just heard, I want to ask this morning a simple question. If you're here today and you've based your whole life on if I do enough good and don't do a lot of bad things, then maybe God will accept me. Or maybe you're here today and you go, I'm just going to try to do better. I'm just going to try to get my act together, and then I'm really going to start, a relationship with God. If you're here and you're on either one of those sides, and you say, I realize today that this relationship with God invites me into is solely based on what He's done and solely based on His grace and love and mercy to me. And today, I'd like to begin a relationship with Him. I'm going to ask you, if that's you, just quickly to raise your hand and put it back down, and then we're going to say a prayer together. We're not going to embarrass you. But you say, today I'd like to begin that kind of relationship with God very quickly. If that's you, just raise your hand, and then we're going to pray together. I want to challenge you to pray this prayer, repeat this prayer with me this morning. Let's stand together and we're going to pray. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, I believe your grace is more powerful than my labels. I believe Christ died to pay for my sins and to remove the labels from my life. I believe you've offered me a new label, a label of acceptance, a label of forgiveness, a label of grace. So today, teach me to live in accordance with who you say that I am. I receive your forgiveness, and I want a relationship with you. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you for your love. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen. Say, lead us in this song, and ask the prayer team to come. And if you'd like someone to pray with you this morning as they sing this song, I invite you to come during this time together. Sing it.